thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Timur. I'm your host tonight, together with Josh. Hi, Josh.
How's it going, everybody?
Tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm feeling very humbled to have some awesome guests with us tonight, and really amazed by everybody that's joining us this evening as well. So welcome, everybody. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we have some wonderful guests tonight. But before we get to that, Josh, do you want to say a few things about our sponsors?
Yes. So I'd like to give a big thanks to our sponsors who have been supporting the meetup. So thank you to Juice, Sonox, and Focusrite for supporting the meetup every month. And thank you very much for joining us. And also, if you want to continue the conversation, we have the audio programmer community on Discord as well. It's a great place where you're welcome to come and discuss all things audio programming. And we have over 6,000 people from all different backgrounds and all different skill levels. And you can join us on the audioprogrammer.com/community. So come join us and let's talk audio programming.
Right. I do have one more announcement. The Audio Developer Conference, the ADC, is happening on the 15th and 16th of November with another day of workshops on the 19th of November. And it's going to be really exciting. So this year, we want to do a hybrid conference, which means we're going to have an on-site event in London in the UK, but we're also going to have an online online experience like we did last year, except we have an even better new platform for that, and it's going to be fully integrated, so you can join online, you can join on site, you can speak online, you can speak on site, and it's all going to be basically one integrated experience. So I'm really excited about that. And also you can still submit a talk, so that would be great. The deadline is actually Monday the 2nd of August, so it's just a little bit over 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, or just a little bit under 3 weeks, actually. So it's not that much time left. So if you want to speak at the Audio Developer Conference, whether it's live on site in the UK or live online from wherever you are, submit a talk wherever you are. And if you're an experienced conference speaker, that's great. If you've never done a conference talk before, that's also great, because we explicitly support first-time speakers. And every topic that has to do with audio software development is welcome. So whether it's music tech, whether it's DSP, whether it's game audio, whether it's, VR, AR, or whatever other topic, communication, whatever other topic has to do with audio software development, your talk is welcome. And we would very much encourage you to submit a talk. So I'm looking forward to that. And with that, I'll hand over back to Josh, who's going to introduce our first guest tonight.
Yes. Before I introduce Gerhard, I just wanted to say a little bit more about ADC. I think ADC is a really valuable experience if you're just getting started in audio development, and really no matter where you may be in your audio development journey. So it has a little bit of something for everybody. And I know I say this every month when we talk about ADC, but it's been one of the most valuable experiences for me when I first started getting into audio development. It was my first time really being around people who are actively in the industry. So I hope for people that are thinking about joining or thinking about submitting a talk, I really hope that you choose to say yes and join us. And if you can, and if circumstances work out, that we'll be able to all meet in London for that. And yes, so ADC, please come and hang out with us. And with that, I will introduce our first speaker, or we're going to have a Q&A with Gerhard, who is the CEO and co-founder of Ableton. And Gerhard is a person who has been, I would say, revolutionary and very influential on me and the way that I try to run the audio programmer. And I think that he has been influential as well, and a positive influence for many people within the industry. And I'm very privileged to have him here. So welcome, Gerhard. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you very much. I think a great place for us to start would be for us to discuss your beginnings, how you got into music tech, how Ableton started, and how those first ideas formed. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been always, I think, more about, personally, more about making instruments rather than making music. Somehow, I think that's maybe more the engineering gene or something. But I was lucky to be drawn into actual music making for real and quite intensely during the 90s. That's after the wall came down in Berlin, and there was like ample opportunity for really everybody to do kind of anything they felt they wanted to do, including like setting up a venue, a club to play, and do as you felt fit. And so we were lucky to be, I guess, thrown into this time and place, and to have like that kind of liberty to play and explore music, and to not have a ton of pressure in terms of career and so on, but to essentially approach the whole thing from a completely naive place, as in, so this thing, electronic music, let's do it. And we were completely I think unblessed with deeper knowledge, and quite sort of gang-ho about it, and made music, and somehow got more into the process and introspecting on the process of how we did it, and realized that a lot of what we were doing wasn't really well, I guess, matching the kinds of tools of the trade. At the time, that's basically Pro Tools. That's what you use on a computer. And we felt that somehow this paradigm that's implemented in like the traditional DAW is very close to, well, unsurprisingly, the traditional studio. So it's tape and mix boards and so on. And somehow that didn't have so much to do with how we happened to make music, which was much more, I guess, improvisatory or jamming, and essentially making the music while you listen to it. And sometimes with an audience next to you, and sometimes not. But I think that whole process lent itself to a different kind of tool. And so we ended up making these tools in Max, and we programmed our own way out of it, so to say. But found traction. Like, some people were curious, like asking, what are you doing there? How do you do this? And so it kind of became apparent that there was maybe more interest in this kind of way of making music and the tools that would be needed for it. And I think then that kind of led automatically into becoming more interested in making a tool that has a more widespread audience, perhaps. And I think, as so often, a lot of what happens in life is accidental, and it's typically about who you meet. So I think for us, a lot changed when I met Bernd, who is my co-founder, who is a very straight up software engineer, not from a music background, but very excited about music. And it was with Bernd that, I guess, the whole idea of making a real serious software program became a more tangible reality. And then we kind of clicked and decided to try this and venture into something new. And we got a little government grant to start, and could start, and one step led to another. But so the genesis of it really is around a very personal need that we found in making music, and then the kind of coincidence of other people also needing something like that. And I think that's a common pattern that many of you will have encountered too. You start making something that you actually need, and that's your motivation.
Amazing. And there are so many threads that I could go off on that. One thing that I wanted to step back to was talking about the situation in Berlin with the fall of the wall, and some of the way that you described it really made me think of New York City in the early 80s with hip hop, and how there was maybe some social and political tension that was happening, and that caused some type of creative abundance that sprouted into something new. Do you think that there's something that's in that these social tensions and political tensions really help really spark that creativity into new realms?
Yeah, I guess that can happen. I don't know if there's any like sort of deeper and definite logic to it. I can say for the one like serious revolution that I experienced in my lifetime, what I can say is I think the vacuum that followed it was powerful. It's not like, people stage a revolution and then they have a plan that they pull out of the drawer on what's going to come next. And I think what we benefited from during this time after the wall fell was a lot of this like, okay, so what now? It's like a moment of limbo. Also, the money doesn't know what to do with the situation yet. In the beginning, Berlin was quite poor and remained poor for quite a while. And it wasn't like, now capitalism is going to embrace this reunited country and it's all going to be a party. It was a lot of confusion, and it took a lot of time, like many years, a decade basically, for the money to figure out what to do about all of this. And during the time, there was a lot of vacancy and a lot of unclarity and, a lot of unattended property also. You could literally open up a club by just taking up the space and doing it. And maybe you will be thrown out a couple of weeks later, but never mind, you open another one. It was very much a playground, really.
And it seems like you were looking to capture some of that essence, perhaps in live, when some of that unpredictability and some of that playgrounds and spontaneity that may have been lacking in other DAWs at the time. Would you say that was where you were looking to go with that?
I mean, it's not like an intention that is foundational to what actually happened, but I think in a post hoc kind of way of explaining what happened, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's also a characteristic time, at least as we were concerned, of utter disinterest in anything like, doing the thing that you're supposed to do. For example, as a young person, venture into a career or make some money, or like all of these things were kind of completely irrelevant. Nobody cared. Also, in my circle of friends, I didn't know anybody who ever talked about money. It was just somehow you made the ends meet, and it always worked in some way with, a little job here or there. And I have to say I was very privileged because I was at university, and at university I had a really nice job in the electronic music studio, which existed. But take that. I mean, this is a technical university, and they have an electronic music studio. They still do. That's Berlin. It's amazing. We had like an incredible situation to be creative and explore.
So once you got your grant and you agreed to start this company, one question that I've always thought about is expansion. So had you ever run a business before? How did you learn? I imagine there was a lot of on-the-job training there.
We had no bloody idea about business at all. And I mean, in many ways, I still don't. I can't read a balance sheet. I'm totally dependent on people with economic expertise. I think you learn on the job for sure. It's crucial somehow in the beginning to find the right people who master it. And I think we were just really eminently lucky. After Bernd and I got together and we found it, it was very clear that we needed somebody who has economic expertise. And we set out to find someone and found a friend, basically, Jan. And with Jan started, I guess, the proper company as a economic entity, with seeking investment and closing a round, etc. And it became from there on like a real, I guess, workplace. Mm-hmm. So that's essential. It's something that I've always found a need for a complementary competence that I know I don't have.
Amazing. And as you were starting the company and as you were starting to hire more people, one thing that I think about when I think of Ableton is a company that seems to be very in tune with a higher sense of purpose and values and responsibility. Is that something that you really thought about from the outset? And what were some ways that you were able to, if so, what were some ways that you looked to instill that within the company from the very start?
I think I'll be careful in claiming a lot there. I think, again, a lot comes from the blissful naivete in how we approach the whole thing. And as I said earlier, it was never about, we will conquer a market. Like that whole paradigm was completely outside our scope of discussion. I think it was always about music. So we have this, we found a thing that actually works, and it's inspiring to other people. Let's go there and let's explore and dig deeper and, fail and try again. And it was always about the actual thing that we do and the people that it actually serves. So I think that came right from the beginning, and maybe that ethos that I described earlier that we grew up in simply. And I think it's a result of like a great place of privilege, I should say. And I think then furthermore, I think we were incredibly lucky in how we were able to see the company grow and succeed to the point that it is now. And I think that all confirms a sense of, wow, we have, a great responsibility now. We have a lot of people who look at us and who, we should have good answers for what they ask. We should have, we should live up to this like big responsibility. So this is a big part of our everyday conversation, and it's difficult to even set clear boundaries to, where does politics stop and where does the company begin? These boundaries are not easy to maintain. I mean, in this day and age, for sure, they're not. And there's a lot of, I guess, stance to be taken. And we try to, to do the right thing, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you, because Ableton has over 400 employees now, right? And how do you keep the pulse of the company with so many people working there? How do you keep a general direction, and how are you able to see if things are maybe going off course and course correct those things?
It's been very difficult during the pandemic, I should say. I think a lot of what you actually sense is between the lines and is at the water cooler, and is I realized even by just observing people walk by, there's a deep communication going on in some way, and it tells you something about where's this person at, what's their state of mind right now. And all of this, I think, happens without a lot of conscious involvement. I think a lot of this communication happens somehow subconsciously. So that's been missing, and I think we've also seen some consequences of that deficit. Like a typical kind of thing that then happens in as a consequence is that a conflict blows up all of a sudden in one corner of a team where you never thought there might be one, and it's just, I think, a result of this, I guess, lack of transparency that's been going on. Mm-hmm. But I mean, what you are raising there is a big issue. There's among 500 people, there's a lot going on, and you cannot hope to know all of it. And it's a very special kind of challenge to still kind of tap the streams of information that are there. It's necessary because these are essentially your sensors. These are your eyes and ears, and there's all the information that you can possibly want available right there in front of you. Just how do you get it? How do you filter it? How do you ask for it? Sometimes people are very forthcoming, and sometimes they feel shy or they don't want to come out and say what they have to say, even so it's so important. So it's very tricky, becomes naturally more tricky with growth.
So we do have a few quick questions from the chat about kind of the early days of Ableton. Filippo Guda is asking, is it true that the first version of Live was written in Max, or is it just a legend?
It's a legend. So I think what this refers to is there was a patch called the PX18 for some reason that Robert Henke put together. And I think in some way it pioneered what became session view in Live. So the idea was, okay, we're going to play a show and we want to bring some materials. Unlike the shows before, we didn't even bring materials, we made them on the spot. So this one was quite advanced to like, hey, we will prepare this time. And now we will need something that will let us perform with this material that we brought in a way that's not like playing back tape. And so we came up with this idea of like these reconfigurable blocks, clips basically. But if you look at the patch, it doesn't look anything like Ableton Live. It had somehow a little bit of a conceptual, I guess, it was a bit of a conceptual precursor to it.
Right. Can I ask another quick question from the chat, which is a little bit off topic, but kind of touches on these early days in Berlin, I guess. The question is whether you have any favorite early German EDM tracks that still inspire you today, kind of from that time.
Yeah. Okay, so German, actually. I mean, you know, the specific sub-community within the early Berlin electronic music scene that I would say we grew up in was the basic channel community. So that's the kind of music that was the reference for us. And Mark Anestis and Moritz von Oswald, basically the folks who did this music, were our heroes, total heroes. And we were lucky to just know them through chance encounter and mutual friends. And they were incredibly important and also supportive. So they, you know, I'm so lucky that I knew these people and that they took the time to talk to us, you know, and deal with us and put our records out on a little label that they made for people like us. Isn't it incredible? These were so important people and still do amazing stuff.
Amazing. One question that I get asked quite often is about hiring. So some people ask a lot of questions about how to get hired at a place like Ableton. We had Spencer Rudnick on the channel last year, and they said that they didn't actually know C++ when they were hired for the live team. And people hear stories like that and they wonder, well, what is it that makes a person right for Ableton? And I'm wondering if I could ask you that.
I'm not sure I'm in a great place to answer that, to be honest, because it really depends on the kind of context that, you know, the person is looking for. So, okay, now this is a meetup for folks in audio programming. And I think when it comes to basically everything around engineering and perhaps UX and design, I think there's a few things that I can maybe share that are generalizable. I think nowadays teams are looking much more beyond the actual, how do you call it? I guess the hard competency or something. So of course, they will make darn sure that they actually hire the competency that they need, but they will not stop there. And then there's a lot of care taken for the other factors that play such a huge role in making this work in light of the fact that it's always in some kind of group constellation. There's really not a lot of things you can do entirely alone in Ableton. Sometimes that's also been a problem that's been recognized, because it can be stressful for people to not be left alone and do their thing. It's a nut that we maybe can crack at a point, but as it stands, most of the work is happening in a team context. And it's really important that you have, a person who's, I guess, bringing the kinds of non-coding competencies that calls for. And it can be very different. This could be also entirely dependent on where the team actually is. Sometimes the team may say, we need somebody who is very much unlike us in here because we are too homogeneous in this group. And nowadays people have a lot of awareness of this kind of often sort of invisible limitation that they live with and want to break through and, open up to something new and some kind of different influence. And then that can look many ways, and it could be, looking for someone who has a different type of character or a different type of background or something. And then all these factors then play into the actual recruiting.
Mm-hmm. And how important do you think that it is to have that different viewpoints within your company? Because I've seen so many times as a person who does recruiting for several audio music tech companies, the profile is typically the same: C++, 5+ years, experience with audio development frameworks. How important is that in terms of the ethos of your company, and how does that manifest itself beyond just how well you can code? I know that might be a very difficult question to answer in a couple words.
Yeah, it is indeed a difficult question to answer in a few words. I think maybe one aspect of this would be, I think one has to watch out for like these how do you call them, folklore or something, like about how many years of C++ somebody needs to have under their belt, presumably. Maybe that's all just not true, Like as Spencer mentioned, it didn't seem for some people that we know quite well to be that kind of limitation. In fact, it wasn't so hard for them to onboard to, a different programming language. It's just that it's only that. It's a different programming language. It's not a holy grail. And then I always felt there's a lot of emphasis on these kinds of formalities when really what you're communicating in writing a computer program isn't, as I see it, isn't so much an intention towards a computer. You communicate an intention towards another human. That's the person who comes after you or who wants to look at what you've done and make sense of it. And that's the hard part. So how can you be clear? How can you state your intention as clearly as possible? And that's, I don't think, so much dependent on whatever programming language is at play. These types of difficulties of how to express yourself clearly are also found in written text. I'll say if somebody is a fantastic writer, perhaps they're also somehow genetically disposed to be great programmers. I don't know, but I often found the focus on the machine is somehow wrong. We should be focusing on the programming as a human in action.
So it sounds like there's a common connection between what your team may look for in engineers and what you look for as a company, which is connection to other people, the importance of teamwork, the importance of seeking a connection in other humans and facilitating expression. Would that be fair to say?
It's I guess it's quite a sweeping generalization, but I buy in. Yeah, I think there's something there. I mean, ultimately, every organization is some kind of, I guess, miracle of communication, and that makes the whole, I guess, the whole topic of bringing people into an organization and somehow setting it up so that people can together make something awesome happen. Very much, I guess, about communication, the ability to communicate, the desire to communicate, you know, the openness, the even this, maybe the habitus, the assumptions that go into the communication is so fundamentally important.
So sorry, can I think I have a question from the chat, which I think works really well with this theme of kind of communication
please.
within a company that we were just talking about. So on the YouTube chat, Ali Somai asks, were there actually any positive consequences for the whole company going remote, obviously because of what we're going through right now?
Definitely. Some people just totally loved it, but other people really hated it from the depths of their guts. It, again, is a very different situation for, you know, folks who just moved from, you know, some different continent to Berlin into a job that kind of is virtual, and that's a terrible situation. And for other people, typically those who have been there for a while and who are, you know, have an established life somehow, it's often been a dream. Like, they rub their eyes and they can't believe how wonderful this is now. And then sometimes some people found the communication easier this way. They found it more effective, more efficient, more fun, and others not. It's very interesting.
And do you think that heading into the future, where do you think companies like yourselves are heading? Is it going to be a hybrid between a remote and in-office approach? Is that where you're looking at going? Because it sounds like you've expressed a lot of value in being able to have those water cooler talks and being able to pass people in hallways. Yet there are definite advantages to remote working as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it will be a hybrid, and I think the exact shape and the gestalt of this is something we have to figure out. We haven't figured out. I mean, it's a total work in progress, like it is for everybody pretty much. And I think it will be a long learning process. But for sure, you know, there's a great somehow a great juxtaposition of what was close became a little more far apart, but what was far apart became much closer. Like, for example, our colleagues from Cycling 74, who have always been working in a distributed manner, have been parts of our all hands meetings, and it's wonderful. And it's like kind of these boundaries became less of an issue. So we welcome it very much.
Amazing. And do you have any advice that you would like to give for anybody who's seeking to start up their own company? There are several people watching who I'm sure already run their own independent company or looking to start as independent plugin developers. Would you have any advice that you could pass on to them? Any helpful hints?
There's many topics involved, of course. I think maybe I would be trying to convey something that's important from my own reflection. But again, I can't know how generalizable it is to other people. I think what I have somehow understood much later in the game is that there's a specific role to be understood as a founder, which is kind of a vulnerable role, where you are maybe a little bit like an artist, musician, in complete charge of the big question of why. Why are we doing all of this? And this is nothing that I think, in honest reality, anybody ever really knows. It's something that you find out and become ever better at knowing what it is that actually motivates you and what your actual idea is about. You never know this completely well. And then, of course, over time, it also changes a little bit as you learn and as you grow. And this is a very delicate, vulnerable place that I think requires the founder or founders to be, how do I say, protective about in the right way. So, for example, I have in the beginnings often been naive in putting a big responsibility on somebody who just came through the door and telling them, hey, you figure this out, I'm sure, you know, and then maybe that doesn't happen in the way you thought. And I feel in hindsight, I should have been much less confused about what it means to involve people in the right way and get their participation, and even, you know, venture into a more democratic way of running an organization, and the sense of authorship that you need. And that is, I think, unique and special, and something you have to be, I guess, treating with great care. You are, as a founder, you're an author. You write the book. And if you write the book, or if you write the symphony, or whatever it is that you're writing, you will be always careful in when do you play the music to somebody else to listen to, when do you give somebody the book, the script, to get feedback. These are delicate things to be, I guess, yeah, you have to deal with these things with care. It's like you have to be a bit watchful of your own psyche in this. So I think,
and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Josh.
I was going to ask, it sounds like a very big responsibility. And one question that I had was about work-life balance for you. Do you find yourself to be a person that sees the importance of that and being a 9-to-5 person, or do you feel that as a CEO that it's your responsibility to be the first in the door and the last out the door? Do you work on weekends? How do you balance that for yourself?
Now, I think in the beginnings, it was a situation like work was life and there was nothing else really. I think this is also okay. You can do that for a couple of years if you're young, I guess, and healthy or something. So there's a pocket for this in life somehow, but then you have to leave the pocket. And I think for me, it's been a decision really, what coincided with having a child. And it was very clear for me that I want to be around. And I limited my work times actually. So I'm not even full-time these days. I work 32 hours. It's not always actually coming around to that. So I'm not totally strict, but I try, you know, and I have 2 afternoons in the week with my son. It's not the weekend, and I have a weekend too. And I'll make damn sure that that's how it continues to be. And I will also support everyone in my company who wants to take that path, and just trust that it will be better for them and consequently better for Ableton.
Amazing. And do you find, who do you look for inspirations to grow as a CEO yourself? Do you read books? Do you look to certain resources to grow and to keep expanding as a CEO? And if so, where do you look to?
Oh, yes, a lot of reading indeed. And the reading, oh man, it's been all over the place. I'm a bit of a, I guess, all over the place reader of philosophy, but also I can see a lot of parallels with what's going on in politics in greater society, with what's going on inside an organization. And as mentioned before, like these boundaries are really hard to maintain these days. People are highly politicized, so they bring this in no matter what. And I think it also is I don't believe in keeping it out all the way. It doesn't make sense. I think organizations are part of societies and they have to play a role beyond their actual purpose. Like, ours has a lot to do with music and culture and empowerment of creative people. But beyond that, we're also an organization where people go to work every day, and that's part of the fabric of society, and politics play into it, and we play into the politics. So I do a lot of reading about politics too these days. And as for developing, competencies as a CEO, etc., a lot of it comes down to coaching. And I have been very lucky with having had great coaches all along. And I also would advise everybody to use that kind of resource.
Amazing. I have one more question, then I'll turn it over to Timur because I know that he'll have some more questions as well. In terms of politics within the workplace, how do you handle that? Do you let that manifest itself autonomously and let that settle out organically, or do you feel the need to step in and help manage that? How do you work with that?
It's a dance, I think. I don't believe in either extreme. So there are some companies that will say, look, our purpose is as follows, and everything else is not our purpose and therefore to be kept out of the workplace. I think that's one extreme that I find difficult. And the other extreme would be whatever comes up, whatever, activism people bring in, let them have it and let's see whatever happens as a consequence. And I think that's wrong too. And I think how you err on that side is that you can easily get to a place where people actually walk out with hurt. And I feel some responsibility for the well-being of people, and you have to stay on top of, again, the communication there. And it's delicate. What's the kind of intervention from the top? That makes sense. What we are now trying to do is to actually learn as an organization the high art of dialogue. And it's like a thing. We try to learn how to dialogue. And it's a group setting, and luckily you can read up a lot about it. It's something that people have tried for a long time. And how can you have as a group, potentially large group, a kind of exchange that goes beyond the exchange of arguments for the sake of winning the argument, but that goes towards putting our brains together so that we can think better and that we can think in a way that we couldn't think alone. And I can just say, wherever I see that work, that's the magic. That's why you have organizations, actually. So I think whatever people bring in from the outside, if you can somehow make it part of a dialogue that makes everybody walk out smarter, it's great. But that's a challenge in itself. Like, it's definitely nothing that I would claim we have cracked or solved, but it's something we are entirely committed to learning to get really, really good at. And then
it's an infinite challenge.
It's an infinite challenge, but I think also it's entirely in line with our purpose. I mean, mind you, we are all about empowering people to be creative and to develop, blossom as humans. And if you think about that, how do you not make that political? How can you keep politics out of that? It's impossible. So of course you could try to shut out the realities of people who have been suffering or who have been oppressed. But you will also block out an important, I guess, source of energy for everybody who's, when dealing with this, can come out smarter and stronger. So it's important to go there and deal with it.
Sounds like it comes right back to the beginning, which is that sometimes it's the tension and sometimes it's that need to come out and to express that causes the biggest bursts of creativity and the biggest bursts of synergy in people, not trying to dampen down the emotions and the trying to keep everything neat and outside of the workplace.
That is true, and I think it's a bit of an ask on everybody to also just endure a little bit of the discomfort that comes with it. And the discomfort looks really different for different people who are involved. But it's, I think, a bit like, hey, can we all try to be cool and not get like totally excited about this now, maybe resist the temptations to put whatever crosses our mind right now into the Slack, and I mean, basically withhold from all the kinds of behaviors that have like terrible impact on the social sphere and greater society. And all of this stuff is happening within an organization just as well. And it's a great training ground. Like, how do you contain your impulse? How can you be staying moderate and reasonable and productive and constructive? And how can you listen first and then be heard? All of these things. So I think everybody is called to up their game when it comes to, that communication.
Fantastic. Teamer, I'm sure we have some more questions. Over to you. Do we have some more that you'd like to ask?
We have a couple more questions on the chat, but I would also like to ask a question myself, actually, if I may. So first of all, I actually also grew up in Berlin in the 90s. So all of the stuff that you said in the beginning, Gerhard, kind of resonates with me. That's really cool. I actually never worked at Ableton. I worked kind of at the other big Berlin music tech company, but I did meet a lot of people from Ableton. Like at conferences or at meetups. So I actually had friends whom I knew from before, and later they joined Ableton. So I met quite a few Abletonians, both privately and professionally. And I noticed something there, which is kind of from the outside view of just like meeting those people. It seems to me that how welcoming basically the culture seems to be at Ableton towards people from kind of underrepresented groups, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation or things like that. Looks like you have kind of actually successfully managed to grow a team, which is kind of noticeably more diverse than I would say like the average music tech company, and kind of even like embracing this diversity kind of as a core part of your culture. And I know from my own experience that like growing a diverse team can be very, very difficult. And so I'm just really curious, like, how did you do it?
I think first things first, I don't think we are anywhere near where we need to be and want to be. I think despite a lot of progress that's been made in the last so many years, it still doesn't, I mean, in particular around engineering, etc., disciplines, it still doesn't look anywhere near as diverse as you would hope. So that's, it's not a done deal by any stretch. And I think to your question specifically, I think we particularly owe pioneers. There's been a few people who had incredible courage to step into these roles as the first woman, or as, whatever, the first gay person, or, I mean, somebody's always first, and they, I guess, pave the ground. There's something there that is very difficult to overestimate, what that kind of courage enables. And then it's sometimes been like these bridge builders, really, like, you just happen to find someone who is naturally able to connect, like a different, I guess, background or a different demographic that they represent with what's already there, in like some kind of way that they can still put up with the pain, because the pain is there and it must be enormous. And they endure, and then at some point it changes. The rest changes. The rest wakes up a little bit to that new normality. And then that new normality seems to become, you know, an asset that people embrace and that they want more of. And then it snowballs. So I think we owe much, I would say we owe much more to those pioneers than, you know, the leaders, the higher ups who, you know, made it happen. That's not how it is. I think we in many cases followed the pioneers. And I'm very grateful to the people who took those pains. Now, meanwhile, there's a lot more going on that's, you know, educated, informed, and I guess more formalized around how to indeed grow diversity on a team and make teams more inclusive and so on. I think we've also gotten better with, I guess, catching up with what the world knows about this, because it's, of course, not a specific challenge to us. It's a very common challenge. And again, I will not claim anything like we are there. It's a long journey.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. Are there some more questions from the chat, teamer?
Yeah, there are quite a few. I don't think we have time for all of them, so I'm just going to pick out some. So there's one which kind of completely changes gears now and talks about technology again. But I find that actually quite interesting. So what does Ableton think about the iPad or like, you know, mobile platforms in general? Are we going to see ever something like Ableton Live for the iPad or something like that?
Yeah, you know, we have like this kind of law that we don't talk about stuff that's coming out in the future. And it's basically a result of learning it the hard way, because we've sometimes announced things and then they didn't happen for one reason or another. And it always felt like a bad taste in the mouth. So we don't do this anymore. And therefore I'll have to pass that question. I can't really go there in any like constructive way.
Yeah, thank you. This is kind of the answer I expected, but there are a couple more questions like that, so now I can just skip all of them.
I'm really sorry. I know this is boring, but you know.
Of course, people want to know. I guess they like your software. But yeah, that's totally understandable.
Managing expectations.
Yeah. Actually, one other question is kind of about kind of what you kind of do day to day. Like, what does a normal day look like for you? Is it mostly like meetings, or is it mostly like other kind of stuff? Like,
most of the day is meetings, indeed. Zoom nowadays, and it's, I'd say, like a mix. Perhaps half of the meetings are one-to-one. I sometimes work for like even a stretch of 3 or 4 hours with just a single person on something together, and I love this very much. I have been making music with Robert Henke one-to-one. I can now work with other people on a thing one-to-one. It's like this creative dialogue that I'm really enjoying a ton. And then we sometimes do this with the executive team, so it's like 5 people, where we like reserve like a block of hours to get into a topic, into like this thinking with a few brains connected as one mode. And that too, when it works, it's magical. I think it's not always, you can't always make it happen. It's something that also isn't, not every topic is conducive to that, but that's a large part of my work and some of what I enjoy the most profoundly, and then there's a lot of writing. I write a lot of communication, but also a lot of like basically strategy stuff. You know, you write a document and then you get feedback on it, and then you process the feedback, and then you get a communication from someone else, like a proposal. I love them in writing, and then you think through it and you collect your thoughts and then you write your thoughts down. And it's a bit like 19th century letter writing communication. And I think somehow the pandemic has actually furthered that, where a lot more of these types of interactions happen now in writing. And I like it because it gives me more space to think. And I don't have to like have the ingenious response to like this complex topic on the spot. I can mull it over a little bit.
Thank you, Gerhard. I do have one last question for you. So, you know, it feels to me that sometimes the music tech industry is a little bit conservative in the sense that we have this paradigm of, you know, DAWs and plugins, and it's been pretty much the same since the 90s, you know. But my question to you is, what do you think of kind of new and exciting developments in music tech? Some new direction that's coming from not maybe necessarily Ableton, but kind of elsewhere in the industry. Is there any particular kind of new development in music tech that you find like particularly exciting or particularly inspiring, kind of going into the future?
I really find it difficult to point at like the one thing that's been happening lately that's like, that's going to change everything. You know, that's the new paradigm or some such. Not so easy for me to single anything like that out. I mean, but there's a ton of exciting stuff everywhere. It just feels like more on an equal ground. So, yeah, I would tell you, you know, if I felt artificial intelligence is where it's happening now, and that's the only place to look, and I would tell you, but I don't see it that way. I think exciting stuff is happening in a number of realms.
Thank you, Gerhard. Yeah, we do have quite a few more questions on the chat, but we just kind of don't really have time to ask all of them. So I want to apologize to everyone who's following us on the YouTube chat and asking questions that we didn't quite have time for all of them. But yeah, I hope we could ask enough of them. And thank you so much, Gerhard, for patiently answering all of these questions. Very, very insightful.
It's been a total pleasure, and I hope I didn't ramble on so much, so we could have gotten to more of the questions. But now, Timo, I have a question for you. You have to tell me what's on that poster back there.
Oh, yes. So it's actually, I am not actually at home. I normally live in London, UK, but right now I'm in Germany visiting family. And this is actually my niece's room. She's 13 and she is this like massive Star Wars fan. So she has this Star Wars themed wallpaper here. And I can actually even switch on this like weird like red light here. And there's other kind of Star Warsy stuff going on. It's actually funny because I then noticed that Josh also has a lot of Star Wars stuff going on there in his room, and actually our next guests also do have some Star Wars stuff going on there. So it seems that we have a theme here tonight, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Star Wars.
You have like a TIE fighter up there and like a Mandalorian helmet.
Yeah, R2D2. Star Wars was a very big part of my youth. Yeah, I love Star Wars. What a fantastic story. Yes, thank you very much, Gerhard, for your time. And yeah, what a privilege. This has been very insightful for me, and I hope it's been insightful for people that have been watching as well. And thank you once again.
My pleasure.
Great. Yes, just wanted to give a quick reminder as well, once again, about the Audio Developer Conference. There's less than 1 month to be able to submit your talks if you wish to speak. And once again, you don't have to be the most experienced, seasoned veteran in order to submit a talk for the Audio Developer Conference. Timur, where do they submit talks?
Right. So you can go to the ADC website, which is audio.dev. And if you go there, you find all the information there, the dates of the conference. Then you click on submit a talk, and then you have all the information about how to submit a talk and until when. Oh, it's actually called Call for Papers. If you click on that, then you get there. And yeah, the Call for Papers is open until 2nd of August. And one more thing I wanted to actually add to this is, if you maybe I'm not sure if you want to give conference talks yourself, or you're not sure if that's kind of your thing, but you have a colleague or a friend who you think would be really great as a speaker, you can also give them a little bit of a nudge as well.
Absolutely. Encouragement is such a great thing within this industry. And I really hope that if you know somebody who's doing amazing work within the industry, or just doing it as a side project or an open source project, that you encourage that person to submit a talk. And if they don't feel confident enough to submit for ADC, they can also submit for one of these audio programmer meetups. So once again,
we have them every month, right? So can you tell us where you do that?
Yeah, this is a great training ground for people who are looking to get into the industry. It could be something interesting that you made in university and you just want to show other people. Please don't feel that it needs to be the most impressive, groundbreaking, pioneering invention. And you can submit for the talk for the ADC at audio.dev, or for the meetup at theaudioprogrammer.com/submit. And with that, I think it's a great time for us to introduce our next speakers.
All right. So very excited to introduce our next speakers. Tonight we have Sam Tarakagian and Alex van Giels. So Sam is a developer at Cycling74, and Alex is a composer and generative video artist at Cycling74. And they're calling us today from Brooklyn, New York, and we're really delighted to have you tonight. How are you doing over there?
Hey, we're doing great. Thanks so much for inviting us, Josh and Timur. It's really great to finally get to participate in one of these. And thank you, Gerhard, for that interview it's so cool to get to hear about the early days at Ableton and how you've cultivated culture there, and just really, really exciting to get to hear about all of that.
Inspiring.
Yeah, really inspiring. And some of the stuff you were talking about kind of early in that, in the story of Ableton, and in particular, making something that solved a problem or scratched an itch that you had yourself. It really kind of segues well into what we wanted to come and talk about, which is this thing that Alex and I have been working on kind of through the pandemic, through quarantine, this Max for Live device and this language for rhythms called NestUp.
It almost describes everything we've ever done together, which is, what is the problem? What is the thing that we're not able to do? What is the pain point? And then in solving for that question ourselves, maybe come up with something that's interesting for other people.
Yeah, exactly. So should we just get into it? All right, let's go.
Okay. Well, with that, let's share our screen and our sound. So welcome to NestUp, a language for musical rhythms, and we'll play for you a little bit of music made with NestUp.
Yeah, a little taste.
So hello, I'm Alex van Giels.
And I'm Sam Tarakagian, as we mentioned before.
Hopefully we're sitting on the correct sides of the screen. and our work.
Yeah, so we're both kind of working at this well-worn territory at this point, this intersection of art and technology. Myself kind of more on the technology side and with some interest in art as well. And so I think you're probably more on the other end of the spectrum.
I think that sounds about right. Sometimes, yeah, I'm a composer and I make art with video, with code. And I would say that sometimes I even write things without a computer. This is an example of that.
And I've been working for a number of years, almost a decade at this point, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I'm working for a long time for Cycling 74, the company that makes Mac's MSP. Some of you might be familiar with. When I first started there, I was working on an iPad interface for Macs called Mira. A few years later, worked on an interface that bridges Macs and Node called Node Script, lets you run Node applications from Macs. And on the side, I've also worked on some other art tech projects that I think are interesting. For example, this project from a few years ago called WikiSonnet that would find blocks of text on Wikipedia that happened to be in iambic pentameter just by chance, and then arrange them into Elizabethan sonnets automatically. So a little bit of art, a little bit of tech.
Where can they find WikiSonnet?
Well, you can't anymore, unfortunately, because the server was really expensive to run, but you know, it exists somewhere.
Imagine how cool that would have been.
Yeah, imagine how cool that would have been.
Yeah.
So we work out of this space in Brooklyn that we call Qt Lab, our little, you can see, we're in the back corner here. So I don't know how, well, anyway, we're in that space right now. That's our coworker, David. And you can see our GameCube as well, but that's been replaced by a Switch at this point.
Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry. We're not living in the Stone Age like cavemen on our GameCube. So like I mentioned, Qt Lab is located in beautiful Gowanus, Brooklyn. You're looking at the scenic Gowanus Canal that you know, so many movies and songs written about the Gowanus Canal, just the height of, you know, kind of New York tourism. It's also a Superfund site. So it's just one of the most contaminated places in the country, but it has since gotten a lot cleaner. They're actually doing a good job of cleaning up the Gowanus Canal.
We hope that they don't clean it up too much. We think maybe some of the ideas actually come from the waste.
Yeah, there's kind of a charm to the
There's a natural
when
charm.
you see the oil glistening on it in the morning. There's something to it.
That's right.
So Alex and I have also been working together for years on creative projects together. And recently we've been working with our friend Marina, who's a violinist, as part of an act called X Bucket. This is a little excerpt from one of our live performances. Marina's on violin, Alex is doing live audio processing in Ableton, and the visuals here are all done in Jitter.
Here's another small excerpt. This is actually in Qt Lab. You can imagine in the before times, we actually had concerts and workshops here. And finally, during the pandemic, we did start to work on some remote performance projects. Here's an example of something we did from our various apartments and Sam seems to have something stuck onto his face. Ultimately, inexorably, it has led to this project that we call Nest Up. And that's what we'll be talking about for the rest of the time that we have.
Yeah, it's just kind of the latest thing that Alex and I have been working on together. So Nest Up, the name Nest Up comes from a contraction of nested tuplets, which is this particular rhythmic structure. Imagine a tuplet is just a division of musical time into some number of note events, I guess. So you can imagine a triplet, quintuplet, what do you call just four? Quadruplet? Just quartet?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, just groups of notes. And the idea with a nested tuplet, it's a semi-esoteric rhythmic structure where within that division into notes, one of those divisions itself is further subdivided. So you can imagine this kind of nested structure. It's something that's it's really fun to play around with and experiment with, but in existing DAWs in Live, for example, it's a little bit difficult to kind of work with.
So you could imagine if you wanted to create a quintuplet and then place a triplet inside of that quintuplet, you could imagine a workflow like this, where you put into your clip the notes that you want. And in fact, actually, you need to put one more so that you get this handle that allows you to drag it.
And to Live's credit, it is at least possible to get off the grid in this precise way.
You add another note. Now these we're going to drag into the space of the final two notes of the quintuplet to place a triplet there. So now we have accomplished our triplet inside of the last two notes of the quintuplet, and it will sound a little something like this. So we wanted to create a different workflow, maybe more experimental or expressive workflow, where you could quickly say, I want a quintuplet, and then on the fourth note of that quintuplet, stretching for 2 beats, I want to place 3 notes. And so that's how the Nest Up language and interface works.
Yeah, and as for why we wanted to do this in the first place, it's basically just because we think these rhythms are interesting. For me, a lot of the stuff that I work on, I'm just inspired by, I find not being very good at making or playing music very inspiring, because it means that I have to build software to get around that kind of personal limitation. And this kind of tool would let us kind of build these rhythms and experiment with them without needing to become expert drummers, And just to prove kind of how cool these rhythms are, there's a really, really great Instagram account called WTF Grooves. This guy Dor, who's just a virtuoso playing with these kind of rhythms, does original compositions and transcriptions. And here's a cool example of something that we found on his channel that we were really inspired by. Can't hear it.
So if you...
sorry.
So if you check out this rhythm, you can see that he's placed tuplets inside of other tuplets, and also the meter itself is fragmentary. It's not like an entire 2/4 meter or 3/4 meter. It's some fragmentary piece of a meter. We were inspired by this and wanted to see how could the creation of grooves like this be easy, flexible, fun.
Yeah, and just to take it even further, like not only do these rhythms sound interesting, but also they just happen to arise all the time in speech, for example. So this is it might be familiar to some people.
To help make the food and keep track of the sales. And now you need houses where people live in and people to make the houses. And now there's more people and they invent things, which makes things better. And more people come and there's more farming and more people to make more things for more people. And now there's business, money, writing, laws, power.
So you can hear how just the natural prosody, the way Bill Wirth speaks, has these kind of shifts in rhythm and these kind of uneven distribution of notes. You can tell that in order to really express his natural rhythmic flow, you need to get off the grid and experiment with rhythms like this. So we really look to these as kind of wanted to be able to do this kind of thing was the goal.
And in fact, these kinds of rhythms with nested tuplets, with fragmentary meters, etc., they're all over the world of music. You find them in Armenian folk rhythms. You find them in the new complexity music. You find them all over. And so it's not just that we wanted to do something that was strange, it's that we wanted to be able to express the musical idea quickly and experiment with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too, yeah.
So
you got a control arrow maybe?
there we go.
Okay, cool.
So
So that's WTF grooves.
so why?
Right. Why make a whole? So you might well ask yourself, why make a whole new thing? There's already Super Collider, which is amazing. There's already Maximus P, which is amazing. There's already tidal cycles, which is amazing. No shortage of interfaces or environments that will let you do this kind of thing. We were kind of interested in three, I guess, particular, trying to design something for three particular uses, or with three particular design goals in mind. One was a very, very flat learning curve. We really wanted something that would take almost no time to learn. Super Collider, Maximus P, tidal cycles are very deep. There's quite a lot that you can do. We wanted to make something simple, purpose-built to this very particular use case. Another thing we were interested in is this kind of notion of what we can call adjacency in creative spaces. It's kind of like if you've got a sound that you really like in live, for example, there by turning knobs or moving clips around or changing values in your live set, you're adjacent somehow to other things that might be musically interesting. And we wanted to set up a similar space, but with respect to the kind of rhythmic structures that we've been talking about. So we wanted to make a language that put interesting rhythms kind of next to each other in a creative space, so to speak. And finally, we were really interested not in building something from scratch, but in building something that would kind of plug into and hook into an existing DAW. So if you knew live, which we both did and both really enjoy using, this would be something that could augment your abilities in live without requiring you necessarily to learn a whole new thing from scratch. And so out of all that, NestUp was born.
And this is Nestor, the NestUp robot.
Yeah, the NestUp robot mascot.
Which is also a valid NestUp expression. So you could parse this as a rhythm.
Right. So the kind of foundational philosophy with NestUp, it's a bit analogous to live or many DAWs in the sense that you have, well, not clips, we call them containers. But basically these are all blocks of time that have been cut up and divided in some way and then filled with node events. And it's by designing and moving these kind of containers around that you can build these really complex rhythms. So now we'll switch over to live, and actually maybe it's worth mentioning even before we switch to live that if you wanted to play with these rhythms, there's both a Max for Live device and an online playground to kind of listen to what some of these sound like and to experiment with them. If you go to nestup.qtlab.nyc, there's an online tool that lets you try the language and listen to what these things sound like. So in addition to that, though, there's also this Max for Live device, like I was mentioning, and we'll show kind of some of the big features of the language now. So just a quick word on how NestUp, the Max for Live device, works. There's a kind of center window where you parse NestUp expressions. And when you do, those write MIDI notes to the first clip slot in the track that NestUp happens to be in. And we experimented with other ways of doing things and picking a particular clip slot to write into. And this ended up just feeling the most natural and easy to use. So the way the language works, like I mentioned, the fundamental unit is this container, these square brackets. And if you just put square brackets in there and push parse, that gives you a single container and a single note event, because containers are filled by default. Where's that note event? It's in there somewhere. There it is. So you can, that's what one note sounds like. So containers can, of course, also, I should say containers can be fixed or flexible by putting a number at the beginning of the container that sets the length of the container. So the containers default to having a length 1, and you can hear that's 3 times as long now because given it a length of 3. But you can also put child containers within that container. So if you have a container and you put others in it, now this is one parent container with 4 child containers, each of which has a length of 1. So right now, the parent container has a flexible length. So its length is just the sum of all its child lengths, but you can also give it a fixed length. And then rather than the child containers determining the size of their parent, their size just determines how they share, sort of, so to speak, the space that the parent has already reserved. Might sound a bit technical. Once you play around with it, it becomes pretty intuitive, hopefully. So they're all evenly distributing that time now, but if you gave one a different size, say 2 for the first one or something, you can see that first one is twice as long, even though the whole thing is still 3 beats long. Okay, so this starts to get really interesting when you bring in the notion of subdivisions. Curly braces denote even subdivisions. So this is a container of length 3 divided evenly into 5 parts. So there's your quintuplet. And once you've got a container divided like that, each one of the individual beats in that quintuplet becomes an index where you can put more containers. So for example, this is saying at beat 3, put in another container that's divided into 5. So now I've got a quintuplet with another quintuplet on the 3rd beat. And if you like, you can get arbitrarily complex, go in there, put another something. Yeah, take the 4th and 5th beat and make those into a triplet or something. So you can start to build rhythms of really kind of whatever complexity you like. Once you've got a container like this, one thing that we thought would be interesting to try would be to add this idea of a rotation to a container. So what's the rotation? Imagine you have a container subdivided into, say, however many parts. You could imagine kind of setting an offset that pushes the whole rhythm back, and then any events that get pushed back past the end get wrapped back around to the beginning. So on its own, this doesn't sound like much, but if you have one beat playing against another beat, rotations create a kind of offset that can change the character of the whole rhythm. So if you have one straight beat, for example, and then another nest up expression playing on top of that, a rotation lets you shift that beat relative to the other.
I'm sorry, are we supposed to hearing sound coming out of live here? Because I'm not hearing anything.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm so glad that you stopped us.
Yeah, is the
because
live,
yeah,
is live?
I know what it is.
Oh yeah, of course. All right, let's try that again. So there's the straight beat.
Yes,
Okay, kick drum.
much better.
Okay, great.
Now it all makes sense. I was wondering, why is there no sound
It
coming
would have
out?
been a significantly more boring demo.
Yeah, that would have. There was about to be a point where it was really going to be bad.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm glad we caught it now.
Yeah, same. So there's your straight beat, and then a little rotation, of course, changes the whole character of the beat. So rounding out some of the language features there, so all containers, as you probably can tell, are full. They have events in them by default. If you put a single tick after the length of a container, it's, oh, is it before the length of the container? That makes the container empty. So you can use this to insert rests and to insert rests. And if you take a container that's empty and then subdivide it, you can put full containers into the kind of slots of that empty container. So you can even kind of make sort of a step sequencer or some kind of sequencer like this. And then the last language feature is this notion of a tie. So very simply, if you've got two adjacent containers and you throw an underscore between them, the tie will kind of glue the last event of the previous container to the first event of the next container. So in this way, you can build a note that's, you know, half of 1/8 note and also half of 1/7 note. I didn't say that right, but it is composed of two of these notes stuck together. That sounds pretty cool. So I know it sounds like a lot maybe, but that is really literally it. That's just about everything the language can do. And it's by design. Yeah, that's true. There's also this, I forgot, there's one other thing, which is containers can have a length and also a scale. So if you have a container of some length, you can give it a scale that just stretches or contracts the whole thing by some amount.
So like here we have the same container back to back, but the second one is going to be 2/3 as long. So that has a kind of cool rhythmic quality.
So by design, so there's no notion of velocity, no notion of notes, no notion of probability. We kept all that out of the language for now, although it'd be fun to think about adding it in the future. All that is handled by the Max for Live device right now, because we really wanted to focus just on the rhythms themselves. So with that, I mean, I feel like it would be cool to talk. So part of the reason that we were really interested in making this in live is because live is such a fun environment to do live performance in, obviously. Not only because of the features that makes live, but also because of things like MIDI effects that can shape and transform streams of MIDI, arpeggiators, sequencers, this kind of thing. And we really want, having messed up means that we can use it in conjunction with those other things in a really seamless way. So Alex has gotten, I think, pretty good at composing in real time, or improvising, I should say, with messed up. So would you favor us with a little demo?
Let's do a short demo here. So just real quick, what I'm doing is I've got basically just two tracks set up that are using Nest Up. One is using this granulator synth from the Max for Live packs. And then this 606 is just taking the MIDI from the same Nest Up expressions. And then I really like to play with Nest Up with these sort of the MIDI effects. So it's using random and scale to sort of distribute the MIDI events that come in from Nest Up over the kit. So let's see what we can do here.
Hey. So there you go. A little flavor of the kind of thing you can do. So yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I really love how I love watching you compose that. I love watching how you kind of stack time on top of each of itself. You know what I mean? Like adding more and more to this kind of loop, and achieving these kind of like. It's funny because I don't have a hard time feeling the beat, in spite of the fact that the rhythm's kind of all over the place. I still feel like the stretches and contractions of time, they feel like natural to me, you know?
I think that that's really the discovery for me with Nest as well, is that these containers, they help me feel natural about these different sorts of rhythmic configurations, in the same way that I think the WTF grooves start to feel natural as you listen to them and enjoy them.
Yeah.
They don't feel like outside of some normal thing, or
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So maybe it would be fun now, unless
take some questions, or do you want to jump in?
I don't know. I mean, I could just kind of go. I would love to go, and I could talk about the. Why don't I talk about the language a little bit, and then we'll come back. But I'll talk a little bit about how we actually did Nest Up, because I think it's kind of interesting. So the first thing to talk about is the language itself. So that's there's this really amazing JavaScript. It's all written in JavaScript. In particular, in this library called, well, I won't look it up now, but it's called Nearly.js. And what Nearly lets you do is it lets you write, this is kind of the heart of the whole thing, these like 130 lines. This is the Nest Up language. And part of what was really fun about working on this project was getting to write from scratch your own language. And it's kind of the thing that like, seemed really daunting to me as a programmer, but it kind of turns out, you know, when you go a little bit deeper into it, it's kind of one of the things that people have been, and it's like the first thing you do with a computer, right, is write a language that it can understand. And so the tools for building this kind of thing are really, really good and really, really mature. So this is the language. And you can kind of look at it and it almost looks like English in some places, but these are basically the rules of what a Nest Up expression is allowed to look like. This is in something called Bacchus-Naur form. It's this way of defining a language where you have just a sequence of production rules. So at the top, you have the root rule, which is just for dealing with Nest Up expressions. And all this says, you kind of learn to read this stuff over time. It says a Nest Up expression is either totally empty or it's a list of containers. If it is a list of containers, well, what is a list of containers? Well, a list of containers is a container followed by a smaller list of containers. And you can kind of start to see how the whole thing comes together. So rules like a container can be either sized or unsized. Well, we have two different production rules for those. And you see that a sized container, for example, a sized container will have an explicit size, whereas an unsized container won't. And then there are rules for how to deal with rotations, how to deal with the range containers, index containers on a subdivided container. All those rules are kind of here. So this is one really big meaty piece of the whole Nest Up thing. And I should mention, by the way, that this is all, this part of the project is open source. Would Chrome be the way to place it together? You ever use someone else's computer and you feel like you're in another country? Thank you. So this part of the project, the language itself, is open source. And if you were really motivated and you wanted to write your own extension to the Nest Up language, you could. You would just come into this repository, make whatever extension you wanted, and then put that library into the Max for Live device. And you'd have your own dialect of Nest Up. So one thing that I'd really like to do is make this whole process, document a bit better, this whole process of how to actually write an extension in order to make it in order to kind of expand the scope of what you're able to do in Nest Up. So this is a big part. And the other big important part of NestUp itself, the JavaScript part, is this container class, which just defines kind of how you go from this high-level grammar to actually putting events into a timeline. And NestUp has a very, very simple way of describing events in time. You just have events. Events are on or off, and they happen at a particular place in time. Although one thing that's interesting about NestUp is it's very, very careful not to use floating point numbers to represent time. We only use fractions of integers. And that's deliberate. That's really important because the kind of very small rounding errors that could pop up if you use floating point numbers to represent your times would mean that when you actually wanted to print those MIDI events to live, they might be like off by 1 tick or something. And this could be really problematic because it could mean now your clip is like 1 tick too long. So you loop the clip and it's slowly getting out of phase with the rest of so it's just really important to use rational numbers. So an integer over an integer to represent time, and only actually make that into ticks at the very last step when you go to write MIDI. I think that's basically, and the cool thing about doing this in JavaScript was that, as I showed, we have this online playground for experimenting with the language. And then because of the way we did the Max for Live device, we can use the same exact code to build the device. So would you open up the device really quick and I'll just talk about that. So the Max for Live device is kind of interesting because it's, actually, so there is a text edit object inside of Max, but we're not using the text edit object to edit the text. This is actually this is actually an instance of, oh, this mouse is cool. This is actually an instance of JWebs. This is a web page embedded in this Max for Live device. So what you're looking at here is actually a web view. So this is running the same JavaScript code that runs on the website. And this would be, if we one day ever port the thing to a VST or something, this will be the really tricky part, is figuring out how to embed a web view or writing our own text editor or something. That will be the tricky bit. So the kind of big high-level pieces of this thing, there's that web view, and whenever you push parse, this just sends the stream of MIDI events out into Max. And then there's an object here, another JavaScript bit of JavaScript code. This just connects that stream of node events to actual events inside of Live. So one thing that's kind of cool about this is that it's aware of differences between Live 10 and Live 11. So if you open this thing in Live 10, you can kind of see down here, there are these lock icons over next to the range and probability. And if you open this in Live 10, you actually won't see those. So those lock icons decide whether if you do apply some random velocity or some random probability to your notes. In Live 11, because Live 11 supports per note velocity randomization, I guess, and per note probability, it will actually you can have NestUp write to your clip with that probability attached to the notes. So in Live 10, you just won't see these, and that functionality is not exposed. So the device will look slightly different whether you open it in Live 10 or Live 11. And of course, there's some code here that uses the Live API to figure out whether you're in Live 10 or Live 11. I won't be able to find it, but it's in here somewhere. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff here that talks to the Live API in a really subtle way. So for example, once you actually write these notes out to your Live clip, there's a little button here that lets you, so here's the notes in the clip. And there's a button here that will let you clear those notes out, and you can see it's turned red because there actually are notes on that in C3, in the C3 pitch lane, there are notes. But if I change this to like C#3 or B2 or something, you see the button goes back to being, because there's no notes in that lane. So whenever you change this, it's actually asking calling out to the live API, seeing if there are notes in that lane, and then changing the button accordingly. And then when you clear it, of course, there's nothing left there. Then the other interesting part of this, I guess, is this little thing down here, the visualizer. And the visualizer is written also in JavaScript, using the, where is it? Using, it's this thing here is the visualizer. This is written using, it's a Max object with a custom JavaScript interface. So the interface is written in JavaScript as well. So that's basically how this whole object works. I'm trying to think of what else would be useful to say about this. I don't know. Can you think of something that I'm missing that I should talk about?
I think that's a good place maybe to see if people have questions. We can go more into kind of how things work. I mean, there's a lot, you know, to explore with like the velocity ranges and the tabs and everything. But maybe let's see if people have questions. And
yeah, why don't we do that? Yeah.
So I actually do have a question immediately. How long did it take you to develop this?
I don't know. I mean, we worked on and off on this because I feel like there were two big spikes where we worked on it.
Yeah. I think it started, you know, mid-pandemic. Sam and I were really good about taking walks together, even kind of at the height of lockdown. And I think during those walks, we would kind of brainstorm about what our kind of music making pain points were. And it started with metric modulation and then worked its way into nested tuplets. But this kind of question about rhythm and defining rhythm in a more expressive way, and then imagining, could that be text? Could that expressive way be text?
I think it probably took us about, I think we were probably working on it for a total period of, I think there was like an 8-month window when we were working. And then with a big gap in the middle. So I would estimate like 5 months of work probably, in just total time.
And those were like pretty hardcore periods when we were really working on it.
A lot of time goes into, I don't know, people are at all different levels of development. And for some people, this will be obvious, but the parts of this project that took the most time were the least interesting parts. So there's a lot of stuff that tries to work with with lives. So if you change the live, if you change the, sorry, I have to point this stuff out because like, you'd only notice it if it was broken, right? But if you go into live and you change the zoom level, where's the flipping zoom?
Oh, yeah, right there, zoom display.
Oh, thank you. If you change the zoom, you'll notice this text actually zooms in. But of course, that's not text in Max, right? That's text in a web view inside of Max. So there's actually like a dance that has to happen there to make sure that text zooms in. That's like a week, 2 weeks maybe of work just to make that work.
What about like the colors?
Or the colors, which I'm not even sure will work until a new version of Max comes out. Oh no, yeah, the dynamic colors are kind of working. So that also takes a bunch of time. So all the details are kind of where all the time goes.
I'd also say there was also like the first few months were just figuring out what is the actual simplest way to describe these rhythms. And in order to get there, we actually had to go through all of the ways you would traditionally notate these rhythms, in Western music notation, and then say, okay, where are these things actually like traditional kind of hangups that we don't need to replicate for our system, letting go of those, getting simpler and simpler in our minds, even of how we would describe these rhythms. That itself took several months.
It's interesting. Like really, I was just gonna say that a really early version of the language looked a lot more like the notation that you see in scores, right?
That's right. Yeah, when you have the kind of like a bracket and you have the 5:4 describing the way how you would put the quintuplet into the group of 16th notes. Yeah, it looked more like that.
So it was a fun challenge to kind of try to figure out what do you want to import from the existing musical language so that it's accessible to people who are coming from a background in score writing, for example. But then also, how do you not pull in stuff that you don't need, I guess, or make your language clunkier than it needs to be. Yeah, that was a fun challenge, actually. Try to figure that out.
And then we had a documentation adventure.
Yeah.
Just trying to figure out how we would actually communicate all this that we've created, so that other people could possibly use it. Yeah, I'd say that's an ongoing adventure.
Documentation is the kind of thing that you learn to enjoy,
Yeah, I agree.
Eventually you learn to have fun writing markdown documents.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is mind-blowing and inspiring stuff. I just want to immediately go in and play with this. I'm a big fan of this like polyrhythmic stuff. It's like just something fresh, something cool, I want to just play with it. So I guess my next question is, how can we do that? Where can we get this thing and play with it? Like, how does this work? Is this going to be a product, or is this like how where can people get this?
Great question. So it is a product. We're selling the Max for Live device. You can also go to nestup.qutelab.nyc to play with this playground. And this is a totally fully functional Nestup. This is as Sam was showing, it's actually the same Nestup code. Yeah. You can also find a bunch of presets of different kinds of rhythms, different instrument sounds, a cheat sheet with rhythms, so that you can kind of learn the language through playing with it. And you also, by the way, in this playground, if you use the export button, you can take your MIDI expressions out into your DAW of choice. And if you press share, you'll actually get a link that saves the state of the Nestup site at that point, so you can come back to the expressions you were working on.
This site also has you were just going to go there. This site also has a link to the Max for Live device itself, which is currently available as a pay what you want. I think it's $29, but pay what you want.
Yeah.
Who knows how long that will. But for now, it's just whatever you're comfortable giving is great. But yeah, it's I think we've had this out for 2 months, maybe 3 months, maybe. I don't know what's next for Nestup, but we'll see.
This is so cool. This is really, really cool. I'm sure people have lots of questions on the chat. Josh, do you have anything on that?
I do. So first question is from Ali, and he asks, are the cells automatable or not?
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's on the short list of things we'd like to add in the near future. That would be so cool, right? To have a container where instead of setting an explicit dimension, you set a dimension that's like $1 or something, and it's mapped to a dial. Not yet, but it would be. It's on the short list. It's on the short list.
Yeah, essentially variables.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's great.
The answer's not yet. There's reasons why that's complicated, right? Because what happens if you automate a container that has children? Anyway, it's just. I agree. It would be super cool, and it's on the short list.
Fantastic. There's another question from Pocket Sounds Music asking, he says, hearing these rhythms makes me want to hear some microtonal pitch stuff, I guess, to match the complexity. Are there any plans to extend this to pitch?
It's also a great question, and one that we've explored. That is what I do in my performances is, so in my performance, that's exactly what I do. Is I kind of associate these rhythms with synths that are playing microtonal pitches, and But the question of whether we're actually going to like add a pitch dimension to the language, I think is a really good question. I also think it would be a really interesting thing to see someone contribute that addition, in the repo and see what the people's solutions look like. Because I think there's actually a lot of good questions about what does it mean to like, split up the space in terms of dimension, and then find those ratios, like in a just intonation sense, based on the same sort of numerical expressions that we're using to split up dimension in the rhythmic sense. So I think it's very fascinating. We haven't done it yet. I'm very interested in it, and I'm actually really interested to see what users contribute.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole nother world, microtonal music. And once you, I don't know, it's so easy to just say like microtonal, and then that could mean anything. It could mean anything from, we just happen to support MIDI events. You just like have a drop down with different tunings, or you could have a much more sophisticated idea of how to do that. And I just don't know enough about microtonal music, honestly, to be able to do it justice, I think.
So what would be cool, I think, is if someone out there would go and do something which is also outside of the box on this, because you see microtonal solutions, but you still have like, the 12 tones of the octave, and you can just kind of tune them a little bit, but it's like you with the rhythms, you're still being stuck in like, writing those like 16th notes with the brackets. But, there's stuff like, there's stuff like, for example, the Boland Pierce scale, where you don't even have octaves, right? You have like the 3-to-1 ratio, and you divide that into like 13 in like just intervals, and it's completely different, but it sounds really cool. And it feels like something like what you've done there could be possible, in that realm. I think that's where people are maybe trying to get at, something which is just kind of more numeric, more abstract, more like playful, and not stuck in this like Western music paradigm.
This is exactly right. That's exactly what what I'd really love to see is a situation in which actually you could use these numbers and these containers as a sort of, as like ratios for creating the intervals. I think that would be very, very, as you say, playful. I mean, one of the things that was the basis of every change and every like commit that we made basically was, with everything that we do, is the language becoming more simple, more expressive, more easy to experiment with, more easy to find rhythms that you wouldn't dream up yourself and then notate. And I'd be very interested to find a similar experience in the pitch dimension.
Amazing. There are some more questions. Are there any plans for syntax highlighting in the Max for Live patch?
Yeah. Yes. 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 it's a really good idea. Also on the short list. It's not even that hard. It's just we're using Code Mirror to implement the text interface, and Code Mirror supports syntax highlighting, and we already have this thing where if like Alex
we may need to share our screen.
Oh yeah, I'll just do it really quickly. We do have support for if you do something that's non-syntactic and then try to parse that, it will at least show you where the error is. I know it's not syntax highlighting, but it's better than nothing, right? And so Code Mirror supports all this stuff pretty easily. It's just a little bit of figuring out to move the pieces into place. But yes, short list. It's one of the things that we want to support.
Amazing. Another question is, did you work together on the Max patch remotely, and did you use Git or another version control system?
Yeah, we used Git for everything. And I'm trying to think if we ever ran into it was like really essential to use Git, just to have a way to try out something on a branch pull that back in. Something doesn't work, roll back to an old version. Hey, Sam, colors are broken now, and this whole thing looks like trash. Can we roll back to an earlier version? It would have been impossible, I think, to do it without something. As a software developer, I'm super comfortable with Git. So that was a natural choice. I mean, we probably could have done it with something else, right?
I think it was good to use Git. I mean, for two reasons. One, I got to learn Git through working on it, which was great for me. And so now I would recommend anyone else trying to do something like this, especially if they have like a, experienced developer to work with, just learn that tool because everyone uses it. It's like a standard, or many people use it. It's a standard. But the other thing is, now that it's done and we wanted to open source the language, our repo was almost ready.
Yeah.
By the time we got to the end of that stage of working on the project, we cleaned it up. We made sure it was clear. We made sure the README was good. We made sure everything was in the right place. And then we were able to make the repo public. So I think that it sets you up for success in the future if you're able to do it in the beginning.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. And related to that, do you have a strategy that you are satisfied with or find intuitive to work on these max patches together? Is there a workflow, or is it just kind of free for all?
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because, a workflow. I mean, so there's maybe like there things that we could have done but didn't do would be things like pull requests, for example. There's all this this kind of stuff that you can do in the space of once you work with a version control tool like Git. There's also a whole ecosystem of collaboration tools and techniques, things like pull requests, issues, for example. And we played around with some of this stuff a little bit. I think we might have used issue tracking through GitHub at some point just to be able to keep track of things. It's really easy to forget when you're working on a big project for a long time what's going on. We didn't do anything like pull requests or any kind of formal system for merging code back together. Honestly, just because like that sounds like work and it's not fun, but I just think we didn't need it. It's a small enough project that it didn't feel necessary.
It's a small project, and we're like, just to peek behind the curtain, we're texting pretty much constantly. The only time when we are not texting is when he is awake and I'm not awake yet, because he wakes up really, really early, and I'm just going to bed around that time. So there's this little window. So there's a pretty there's a kind of an ongoing interchange in this particular situation that allowed for remote collaboration. But if it was a larger team, a little more complicated, and we were all patching together in Max, that we'd want to come up with another system.
It would have been interesting trying to figure out how to do things like, I don't know I've never done a code review of a Max patch before.
Right.
It would be hard. It would be difficult the tooling's not there, right? Like you can't there's no tool that will show you two Max patches and say, oh,
this thing is green and this
thing's red, this thing conflicts, this thing has changed. Doesn't exist. So that would have been a challenge. It's lucky it didn't come to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The person that asked about that wanted to just underline the ever-emerging merge conflicts, especially when we're working on max path files. So yeah, that's what that was related to. Let's see.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all the questions that we seem to have. Yes, thank you very much. That was very awesome. Very intriguing. I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes.
Thank you. It's really fun to have a chance to come and talk about it, share it with your community.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Great.
Thank you so much. This is really inspiring stuff. I really can't wait to get my hands on this and play with it.
Let us know what you think. Be very interested.
Yeah, can you give that? I put the website in the chat a few times, but can you just give another shout on the website for that again? So it's nest up.
Sure, it's nestup.cutelab.nyc.
Yeah, great. And I'll be sure to put that in the video description afterwards as well for people who are looking to find it. Thank you very much, Alex and Sam. And now we are coming to the end of the meetup. So there are a few things that we would like to discuss. So first thing is, if you would like to submit a talk for the meetup, we welcome all submissions, no matter where you may be in your audio programming journey. And you can submit on theaudioprogrammer.com/submit. Once again, only less than 1 month left to submit talks to the Audio Developer Conference this year, which will be on November 15th and 16th. And you can come out and hang with us in London, or you can also deliver your talk online. And the place to deliver that submission is, Teamer. Where is that again?
So you can go to audio.dev, which is the ADC website, and there's going to be a link saying call for paper. So if you click on that, that's where you can submit a talk, basically. And you have until the 2nd of August to do so, which is a Monday.
Yes. And speaking of August, we also wanted to talk about our next meetup. So we meet up every second Tuesday of the month from 6:30 to approximately 9:30 BST at the moment, British summertime. So we've had a lot of discussions about time zones lately. And so the 10th of August, 6:30 to 9:30 is the next meetup, and we hope that you can join us, and we will be announcing presenters for that very soon. And with that, we are finished. Anything else to add, Teamer?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you so much for joining us, to Sam and Alex, and also Gerhard. Was a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much for joining out there on the internet, and see you next time.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Great.